Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Yarns with Andy. Today I've got a panel discussion focusing on the betterment of the procurement process in New Zealand. This is my first panel ever, so I've got really interesting guests today. Raine, James, Martin, and Matt. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Okay, so a lot of you out there already know me from my LinkedIn posts. I'm Raine Selles. I own Concordia Resolution and arrived on these shores 11 years ago, at which time I decided that I've just met the Wild West. 11 years on, I haven't really changed my opinion very much. Things are not improving. In fact, they seem to be getting worse. My background is I'm a qualified quantity surveyor and PM with a law degree and a master's degree from King's in construction law and arbitration. I've been training 3910 here for the last 11 years. That includes government departments, developers, contractors, subcontractors, and so on, and even consultants, actually. A lot of my work is dispute resolution, so I'm there at the cold face and really, understand the nitty-gritty of the issues that we are encountering and have encountered, certainly for the last 11 years since I've been here. And probably that's enough about me, and I'll take you over to James.
Yeah.
Right. So my name's James Hunt. I am an independent consultant, and my specialist areas really are around project support, so risk management, program, project controls, all that type of stuff. But then in the last little while, I've started to pivot my business a little more towards project strategy, independent coaching, that type of thing. And the reason I'm doing that is because I feel like the construction industry is not a great place to work. And
It's not.
I feel like with stronger disciplines, better project performance and better leadership, we've got an opportunity to get us back into a passion profession that we can all enjoy a bit more. So that's sort of what drives what I do.
Awesome, mate. Over to you, Marty.
Hi, I'm Martin Edwards.
Yeah, my pleasure.
How do I describe myself? Look, I'm a services engineer back in the day, but I've gradually over the years gone on to become a project manager, construction manager. And one of the areas I particularly enjoy is that pre-procurement area, methodology, programming, worked closely with Andy on those sort of things. And one of my passions, I think, is really to, much like James and Renee have said there, is that we need to try and get a better model at the front end, I think. So one of the things I'm really trying to push is this PCSA world, or ECI. Try and get some involvement far earlier in the piece, get those consultants around the table a lot earlier, listening to sort of good common sense advice, I think, in terms of how things could be built. So I'm trying to direct myself to that. My mainstay of work at the moment seems to be going into companies and helping in that pre-construction area. And sometimes the construction area, there's a lot of grey hair missing out there. So I think a lot of experience is required, and it's pretty rare at the moment. So we're getting called into all sorts of things. So yeah, passion is that front end. Try and get a better procurement model, particularly in the health area, and like to see some results before I retire.
Thanks. Good to be here. My name is Matt Stanford. I'm pre-contracts manager for pipeline and civil. My background is, for the last 15 years, been working in civil construction, everywhere from small contractor, went through design management, moved into ECI, project delivery, and now pre-contracts. So I'm living the day-to-day struggles of procurement models that aren't quite working. I've had great experiences in the past with models that are more collaborative and favourable. And I'd like to see a movement in that direction. So hopefully this panel can discuss some of that and try and direct some of that movement in that way.
Absolutely. So the special thing about this whole panel is all of these people have been on my podcast individually. I think we're all here together. Raine from the back end, James, who manages risk on all the projects, Martin, who's focused on the front end, and Matt, who's living the procurement nightmare.
The struggle.
The struggle. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be a good one. So I think the first question's an open question, right? So what are the current procurement models employed in New Zealand, and are they effective?
there's probably fair to say there's a huge range of those models, ranging from very highly collaborative models, where ECI or even partnering and developing a program that works where we engage in long programs of delivery, through to the other end of the scale, which is a construct-only, lowest price let package. There's a whole lot of stages in between: design, build, construct, operate, design, build, then procurement based on priced and non-priced attributes, right back down to that. So I guess there's a huge range. I'd probably say that a bulk of the packages that I'm seeing come to the market sit in the lower or lesser collaborative space, so the lower
Right.
end, so lowest price with maybe a token gesture of non-price attributes.
Yeah.
But I see that as being a huge missed opportunity. We could, if we were working more the other end of the scale.
I agree. I mean, it's fundamentally a fixed price procurement model that we live and breathe in New Zealand, isn't it? And maybe as little as 20% are some sort of collaborative model, either ECI or, like I said, token ECI, maybe 1 month or 2 months before they start, which is not going to achieve too much.
Yeah.
And then you get, once you take it seriously and go for that sort of 12-month or more ECI or PCSA period, that brings in a lot of debate, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of evolution, innovation.
Yeah, true. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
Well, look, I mean, for me, I've spent the last sort of 10 years working largely on alliance contracts. So, enormously collaboratively driven, based on shared risk models and all that type of stuff. But I'm one of those people that always seems to want to leap to the next part of the conversation, I guess. And for me, that is, and we mentioned it before, is about behaviours. And I've most recently been working on a FIDIC, but at the same time, the behaviours that are surrounding the way that contract is being operated are actually more collaborative than some of the alliances that I've been on. So my view is that, and I remember I was asked in an interview once, what can you bring to this project around your alliance experience? And I started talking about all these positive contracting behaviours, but then I realised it doesn't matter what type of contract you've got if the contracting behaviours are right and fair and reasonable. And so that's the sort of message that I keep coming back to, is it doesn't matter so much what the contract form is, providing the behaviours support the right type of outcomes.
And I think it's certainly in vertical construction, where we're talking of developers and profit, a lot of it is governed by the banks as well. They've got far too much interest in, the financial side of contracting, which means that terms and conditions tend to be drafted so that all the risk is put on the contractor. Until these kind of behaviours really change right from, the top, we're not really going to see much change in behaviours at site level. As James says, you can have a contract which is collaborative, but if nobody wants to be collaborative and act in a collaborative way, then it's not going to make a lot of difference to the outcome. And the outcome we're seeing, 700 disputes in 11 years that I've worked on, a few $1 billion worth of disputes have all been fixed price lump sum contracts. They go out to tender on the basis of maybe a 60, 70% design, wanting a lump sum for that. And then the principal gets, shitty when it all goes over budget and over time. Well, really? It doesn't take a rocket scientist, does it, to figure out that if you go out and want a lump sum price on a 60, 70% design, you're not going to be budgeting properly, in the first place. So get your design team sorted, get your design sorted, maybe go back to bills of quantities. Why are we allowing tenderers to, contractors, most of which aren't qualified quantity surveyors, to actually, price the works, measure drawings and so on, when really we've got qualified consultants like your RDTs, your RLBs and WTPs of the world and many more that could actually prepare the documents properly, include an ECI process with the 3 preferred contractors and do a better job.
No one wants to do those schedules, but with BIM, doing them a lot easier.
Yeah.
So we need to take advantage of BIM on that one.
Yeah.
It's so much easier with it.
It's so much easier.
So yes or no, right? So is the procurement process in New Zealand effective? Raine?
No.
James?
Well, clearly not.
Marty?
Where the collaboration model comes in.
That was a yes or no, mate?
Fundamentally, no.
Matt?
Occasionally, yes.
Yeah, no, we definitely have some issues.
Cool. Matt, with New Zealand's current procurement model and its focus on cost, you working for Pipeline Civil, you understand at the coalface how these things work. So how does that affect the stress levels on site?
Yeah, I guess I can talk more specifically about the stress levels at the pre-contract phase as a starting point, but then I can lead on to on site. So just to paint a bit of a picture, we're considered probably what would be a tier 2 contractor. So we do a lot of subcontracting to tier 1s. So what we're often finding is we're getting lump sum, construct only pricing, or sometimes measure and valuable pricing requests through from from tier 1 contracts like the Fulton Hogan, Fletcher, and other partners like Eastern Busway Alliance at the moment. We get packages relatively late in the piece because they have to produce their packages. Occasionally they'll do takeoffs and prepare the documentation. We receive that, and we're often given about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to prepare a price for what could be easily $10 million packages. So we have a defined timeline in which we have to try and scope our works. We have to digest the packages that have been received. We have to define what our scope of works is. We then need to go engage our subbies or suppliers to get pricing, and then pull all that together and present an offer that protects us both commercially while also being competitive, because almost always as subbies, there's non-price attributes are just out the gate as lowest price straight off, and almost like the bottom line is considered first, and that's when they'll start talking to you. So the stress with that is trying to define the scope and understand what we're being asked to do, both in construction scope but also in commercial risk, which is really hard to define. And I guess that's a real challenge, is how you do that. What it does lead to is I take the approach where we try and define our scope and commercial position very clearly. So we have a huge list of tags. Well, I shouldn't call them clags, I call them clarifications where I can. But my intent with that is to really try and say, this is where we're starting this and stopping. And these are the errors we've found, or the potential omissions, or the design information that isn't quite right, and try to point ourselves in the right position or place where we've positioned our pricing. Now, that's a lot of work in itself, and you kind of go part way to try and solve the problems that you're finding in those packages. But I'd really like to take to the next step and go, okay, why don't I solve those problems instead of saying I've made a decision, I've excluded it, or I've assumed this, or whatever, and there's still an outstanding issue that has to be addressed at some stage. I'd love the opportunity to try and solve those progressively as a partner. I think that's a real challenge. So if we just take that through to the next phase, say we become preferred contractor, we start negotiating a contract, we typically try and resolve a lot of those issues as we go, but sometimes time constraints means that we can't. And therefore, those carry through to the construction phase, and the project manager or likes of get this list of clarifications going, these are tags in our contract now, comes through to a new team that's now delivering for the client side as well. And they're just like, what the hell are all these? How are these interpreted? What do these mean? Why are they in here? Why didn't you just price it completely? And well, because we had to clarify, because you didn't give us enough information. Like I mentioned before in our introduction, I just see that as a huge lost opportunity. Why could I not sit down with the head contractor, with the designer, with the principal, and start solving those issues early, so it just flows through? Our pricing is more robust, and then our delivery, the tender program, the tender cost, our resourcing is all more accurate, and we deliver a more successful project. So yeah, I guess that's the pain. That's where the stress lies, because those packages just aren't well defined. Design's an issue, like Raine suggested before, often less at a relatively low level of design finalisation. And then the changing over of the teams becomes quite an issue as well, from pre-contract to delivery, and same on the client side.
So Raine, you deal with the back end of that, don't you?
I do, and coming from
I say we, sorry.
Yeah, we do. Coming from the UK, one of my biggest shocks when I got here was the fact that contractors are expected to work on uncoordinated drawings. In the UK, any of you guys that worked in the UK, the contractor gets, he tends to price off a bill of quantities, and then he gets a set of construction drawings which are fully coordinated. Here, the consultants seem to work in silos. There doesn't seem to be any coordination between the consultants, and therefore, there's no coordination between the drawings either. So, the contractors have got to spend a lot of time, going through drawings and making sure that, they're workable, they're not missing anything, which is why we always have huge RFI,
Massive
a
lists.
massive list on every single dispute that we seem to be involved with. If we could actually have consultants working together to provide coordinated drawings to the contractor, then that would go a long way, I think, to actually resolving the issues. But again, you need to complete the design at the start. There's no point just giving contractors bits and pieces to work with. It's just the whole kind of team effort doesn't exist here. And I've run some massive projects in the UK, both civils and vertical building. And one of the key things that actually made those projects a success was communication. I'm not a keyboard kind of person. I'm a walk down the road or go and see them or pick up the phone and actually communicate. And that's what's really lacking here, is that communication. It's all kind of done on email. It's all done between lots of different people. There's no accountability of anybody. And this is what I was saying last night, that SEL do on engineers to the contract role. There's nobody accountable across the thing, It's just this seems to be this kind of free for all, no organisation, no communication, no risk, registers, no, actually sitting down together, identifying all the risks on the projects, allocating them to the person, who's best able to deal with them. I'm used to working under NEC, so the project manager issues an early warning notice, and registered from day one. We're not doing that, and yet we've still got this. We've got an advance notification in the clause 521 in 3910. Only seems to be actually issued by the contractor, never by the engineer to the contractor. And then when he does issue them, nothing's done with them.
Yeah.
So they just sit there, or contractors get accused of being too contractual. So it's just a complete mess.
It's a strange concept, isn't it? Actually completing something before you go to build it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You wouldn't program an automated car factory with 60% of the design. No. You'd end up with, what would you end up with? Something pretty
of a car.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think the model's there to solve that problem. Every time everyone works together earlier, you get a better result. It's proven.
Which is where ECI contractors from ECI, contractors undertaking ECI phase, or PCSA as it may be called, is I feel that they do actually have an opportunity to fulfill a role in that space. You're talking about coordination of design elements within the design offices. I've had a great experience working with design office and actually helping in that coordination, providing that early contract input. And that early contract input is almost a phase that can allow those design leads to come together and actually consolidate. And like you mentioned before, also the use of BIM and smart models these days helps with that hugely.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We had an interesting issue with design construction interface on a job I was working on recently, and I sort of feel like there's a meeting point in the middle for those two teams to better understand each other's problems and the way that they have to operate. And the specific example I'd use is that there's certain elements of design that can only get to 80% without the construction input or the methodology input or the guys out on the site seeing things exactly as they are, whereas the construction guys have got an expectation of more detail and more direction in those spaces. So I've been waging my own independent sort of war against this idea that the design can be complete. And we have this idea that the designers do their work and then off they go. And it just doesn't work like that. It's an ongoing collaborative process of solving those problems. And as you say, if you can get it done before you put a spade in the ground, well, that's better. But there's always going to be things that can't be resolved until that spade is in the ground and we learn what exactly it is that we're dealing with. So
how much of a design is reliant on the temporary works design that feeds into the permanent works design, or how much opportunity is there by integrating temporary works and permanent works designs together? Again, another example of getting in early and collaborating early.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the question I was going to ask you, Raine, when you talked about it was there's absolutely an obligation to communicate better, but there needs to be a willingness and an ownership of who exactly it is that's supposed to own that communication. When you're a project manager, are you prepared to actually step up and be the person who creates that collaborative environment, gets the people in the room, corrals the conversation, makes sure that issues are actually closed out? And it's that willingness that can be missing a little bit. And when we talk about the parts that are missing in the New Zealand contractual environment, you need those individuals who are finicky and are prepared to just keep digging on something until it is done.
Mm.
And if there's a change coming, you say the early warnings come through, right? Someone has to really care about owning that process from start to finish and it being really clear who does. Otherwise, as you say, you end up with this nebulous mass of assumptions and not quite agreed elements and, not quite closed out program change or whatever it is. And it becomes just a really tough thing to manage.
Yeah, it's interesting points there, I suppose. The amount of stress that adds downstream to the people who work as well. Okay, should we cut that there? Move on to the next.
There was one point I thought was worth making. And I personally don't have an issue with a cost-focused procurement process.
You don't?
I don't, but it's only providing you're getting the right price. And what I mean by that is, you go through and you price risk and you price that, and providing there is a clear understanding of how much money there is and where it sits and that there is enough, then that removes one of the big stresses.
But that's the thing though, right? Like Matt said, you'd have all these tags and a whole lot of provisional sums that you price for because you don't have an accurate design.
Or on the flip side, you have a contractor who may not be experienced or not understand but wants to break into a new market and will price a lump sum with no tags because that's their approach to pricing packages of work, and you end up with an underqualified contractor who can't deliver that package of work, which is a huge risk for the main contractor.
Yeah.
So if you just go on straight price assessment, how do you identify that risk?
Oh, I'm not saying it's a straight price assessment, but I'm definitely thinking that the client organisations need to step up big time to ensure that the type of thing you're talking about doesn't happen. And they're perfectly entitled to do so, to create a procurement structure that ensures that, and of course, we actually want to provide opportunity for new contractors to enter the market. I mean, that's one of the key things. But we've got to make sure that they're doing it with the right capability.
But here's the thing, right? The organizations that actually represent the client, they sell the services to the client, helping. What's the dream that they sell? I'm keeping the big bad wolf, Mr. Contractor, away from your door.
Oh, look, you've thrown the hook, and I know you did it deliberately because I've got a real bugbear about this. And so in the example, you're in a pure alliance, supposedly the most collaborative contract environment that can be created. And the problem is, though, that there's various agent provocateurs thrown into that process who are supposed to, be checking value for money and generally you've got your independent estimators. And of course, the problem being that if I'm an independent estimator, absolutely I'm going to try and find the fat and narrow things down and say you can't have that, you can't have that. But the problem being is that it creates a perverse outcome
100%.
because of the position of responsibility that person holds. Now, how can fair pricing exist if your only objective is to squeeze the contractor as much as you possibly can? And as you say, based sometimes, and with a pure alliance, you're talking generally about 30% design. You're not talking about anything further than that. So it's and again, I think it falls back onto the client to be incredibly clear what it is they're expecting from all the participants in that process. And so, and with fair pricing right at the height of that.
Perfect, well, stuff.
I was just going to say, just on that point around the collaborative nature of a head contractor or alliance, so what you often find is the main contractor has a procurement letting process that defines that they have to get 3 prices, and often the principal may make the main contractor be obliged to accept the lowest price. And that's often because the cost of consultants want to go in and say, okay, we're going to take those 3 prices and we're going to take the lowest, and that demonstrates that you're getting the most value for money. At that stage, at that subcontractor level, that's a lot of the time is where the attributes of that subcontractor fall out the door.
You're exactly right. Yeah, it feels like, as you said, at the different tiers, the values are diluted
100%
each time you step down. Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, you've got 3 different, perhaps up to 10 main contractors tendering the job. Each one of those is going to be going out to a plethora of subcontractors. Some of them will be
Same
common
ones.
amongst them, others won't be. So, that dilution going right up to the point where the main contractor's trying to plug all the contingency required where there's design risk or where there's 60 or 70% because they're very quick to say, oh, that price is too high. There's too much fat in there, but they're not quick to throw back. Oh, we realise there's a bit of a design issue there.
There is.
So we'll let you fatten that one up.
There is a human factor, though, and and I mean, again, an unnamed organisation that I spent a bit of time with had one of their very senior guys leave the organisation. And the thing that was his tipping point was that they put a subcontractor out of business.
Mm.
And he said, I've been with this organisation 25 years and I'd never put anyone out of business. And that's the human factor of saying we actually get alongside each other. We make sure that nobody's going to take too much pain or at least is going to share in whatever pain is coming. And I think that's a really important cornerstone for any principal in New Zealand's construction industry, is to say, you know, when we take a subcontractor on board, we're taking a responsibility to look after them, as well as to get accountability or performance or whatever the other things we normally talk about are.
James, we've in the New Zealand construction procurement model, or say just construction procurement model, probably all around the world, we've got this risk hand grenade that we keep passing from one silo to another, right? Risk hand grenade's a word I stole out of Marty's handbook. But
What are you talking about?
you don't know what I'm talking about. but it's such a common occurrence, though. We keep passing it from the client wants to pass it on to the main contractor wants to pass it downstream, and the people working on the ground carry the most risk. How do we better manage that, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a hot topic for sure. I sort of want to cut back to this idea I said before about having the right amount of money. And one of the keys to risk, and it's a terrible understood truth in New Zealand construction, that risk is 5%. And risk might be 5% if there's a certain amount of definition in the base, and that you've priced things generously in the base and all that sort of thing. And now, of course, anyone who's looked at worldwide trends and all that sort of stuff will clearly understand that risk is not 5%. And there's actually some really good guidelines out there that our client organisations can use. But the next step is actually for those client organisations to take seriously what those guidelines are and to be able to contract accordingly. So a great example is in the UK, they've got a system, or they used to have a system called the GRIP process, the Guide to Railway Investment Programming. And it was a 9-stage process for project development, which gave really clear instructions on what the industry tells them the uncertainty is at each stage of that development based on design and all that sort of stuff. But of course, they were also doing it in an environment where the industry was quite predictable. And they had a number of established contractors who were used to doing the work. Railways, of course, are often quite a controlled environment. And so therefore, you know, the way that they ran it was quite, you know, predictable. Now, to give you an example, when you went into a D&C in the GRIP process, it was considered sort of stage 4 of GRIP, which is something like a 35% design or something like that. They expected you to have a risk assessment that was returning something like 20%. And then on top of that, they added plus 25 to minus 10% as a potential variance on what the client should be expecting from the market. Now, that's quite a lot. And in New Zealand, we're going into alliances at 30% design with 5% risk. So it seems strange to me that the knowledge and the experience and the industry repetition of this is out there, but until people choose to take it seriously within the industry, then it's not going to work. So whatever risk exchange it is that we negotiate through a contract is fine, providing there's enough money to fund it. And as I say, back to the human factors, there's an understanding that if things go wrong or they continue to go wrong, and we've certainly had some projects recently, if we think in the last 12 to 14 months, we've had a number of COVID-related adjudications and that type of thing where we've had to settle contracts in that way. We've had a massive storm. And so we're largely dealing with any project that's been going for more than 3 or 4 years has faced 2 massive black swan events. And those are the sort of things that our procurement process from the risk perspective just can't cope with. And so, you know, number one, be fair in your allocation of risk. And of course, based on the standard principles, which we all agree, which are place the risk in the best place for it to be managed. Yeah. Make sure that's very clear, make sure the communication's clear, and make sure it's adequately funded. But also make sure that you're very clear from the client perspective on where it is the client probably needs to step in and help when it's not appropriate for a contractor to have to absorb certain costs. So that's the way I feel about it. But it does again fall right back onto those collaborative principles we were talking about and fairness through the contracting process.
So collaboration is key.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So Matt, you're dealing with it from the other end of it, where you're actually taking on a lot of this risk. How do you think we can actually stop the risk hand grenade being handed down to you?
Yeah, well, I mentioned before is that I try and define that very clearly in offers. That's why I have
You-
a massive list of clarifications.
So you mean you tag the shit out of it?
Pretty much, yeah. But I think that's the fair way to do it. I know that if I was to put on 5, 10, 15% risk, that may be appropriate in some of these tenders that I just won't get through.
Mm.
So my approach would be to at least give the head contractor and principal the opportunity to understand what the base cost is, what those risks are, and then hopefully I have the opportunity to get in and help explain what work with them to value that risk by having a collaborative discussion, saying, okay, these are items outside of our control, so it best sits with you, but this is how I deal with it, and this is what our time or cost delays or time and cost may be to manage that risk. There's other elements that certainly sit within my realm to manage the risk, but I need to understand the scope or the inputs for me to be able to price those better. And my whole approach is to try and make that as clear as possible in our proposal so that we can then move forward and value that.
Yeah,
I think that's a good approach. I review a lot of tenders that are coming in, and there seems to be this fear from subcontractors to ask questions. And admittedly, it's usually in a 3-week period because that's all the tender is, and that's something else we could talk about in this procurement period or tender period. But in that period, you've got a very finite time to review the drawing specifications and ask the right questions. The fear that they have by asking the questions is that their price will be undermined somehow, being allow for that thing that they've spotted, and they put a contingency in there that the others haven't spotted, and they're going to win the project because they haven't spotted it, which is not a good place to be.
Oh,
So I encourage all the guys tendering to basically ask the questions, because the one thing that happens from that is we'll pass those questions upwards, and then I have to give the answers out. To every single subcontractor. So all of a sudden, you're leveling the playing field. So if there's one thing I would advise is to agree with you, is actually to ask those questions, because the answer's got to go out to all of the other subcontractors. So all of a sudden, that $100,000, you think, oh shit, that's going to cost $100,000. We don't want to put that in there. Well, I'll tell you what, we won't put it in there, and we'll see if we get it as a variation later. It doesn't work.
It's your quickest road to dispute.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely. So ask the question. Don't be scared of asking that question. Remember, the answer's got to go out to all of the tenderers. So all of a sudden, that playing field is level.
Yeah, and a lot of what I see are actually head contractors saying to subcontractors, "No tags,
No tags.
no tags."
You really?
Yeah, no tags. Don't want any tags.
Yeah.
Which is just commercial suicide as far as I'm concerned. Because if you're going to take a subcontractor on with no tags on the lowest price, which often they do to try and win the tender, those guys are going to struggle to get information. They're going to struggle to be managed in many ways. I mean, I work for a lot of subcontractors that are mismanaged by main contractors. So many. So they're on a losing wicket to begin with, which means so is the contractor. But the trouble is the contracts, the subcontracts, have clauses in them which say, you're only entitled to an extension of time for anything we get. You're not entitled to any costs. And in this climate as well, where, there's a complete lack of understanding of fluctuation clauses in contracts. So, project gets delayed, and subcontractors, like starting 2 years later than they should have done, and main contractors going, I don't care, there's no fluctuations. You're just going to have to get on with it. Well, actually, no. The basis of the bargain, whether you're going to do it here, you're entitled to increased costs as a variation. That complete lack of understanding is killing subcontractors, and particularly given all the delayed issues due to COVID. We've got one at the moment. I've just written to a main contractor saying, actually, no, the price is not fixed. We priced it in 2019. You can't come and expect us to start, 4 years later at the price of 2019. It's just nonsense. Yeah, but main contractors just constantly come back and go, well, no fluctuations. You just got to get on with it. You've got to start next month. Well, we're going to start claiming against you. It's these bad behaviours due to lack of education and communication and risk identification right from the
Does that start above, though?
It does. It does start above because, there's always that pressure, isn't there, on price. Whereas we have that early contractor involvement process where, I always say to clients, listen, these guys are on the ground building the work. These designers are actually, looking through their books and their catalogues at these nice products. Oh, yeah, it comes from China, but don't worry about that. It looks nicer than that one, from New Zealand. Now, these guys are on the ground. They know what procurement times are for them. They're working with it. They know whether or not they can actually get it in time to meet the program if everything's running late. These guys need to be used in that process to try and eliminate
Sounds like an ECI.
wastage. Exactly.
However-
ECI.
However,
And if we go to that, early contractor involvement and have that collaborative way of working, most of these disputes I get involved with will be, negligible.
does come back to that big word though, which is trust.
Yeah.
And what I've found, and I've worked on both the client side and the contractor side quite a lot recently, is the amount of distrust. And I would count on maybe one hand the number of people I believe sit in our construction industry at the moment where the clients are prepared to listen and take their word as being reasonable and not just the behaviour of a contractor. And there's just not that many of them that our client organisations seem to trust, and they need to, because as you say, it's not generally in the contractor's interest to feed a whole heap of nonsense. They do tend to be speaking from experience,
Yeah. So is that the client, or is that the advice the client's getting?
It's probably a combination.
Yeah.
And the difficult thing is, I mean, there's not a huge amount I remember from my university education, but one of the things that has stayed with me was the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if you guys have come across the prisoner's dilemma, but it's a concept where two prisoners are given the same offer. They're not allowed to speak to each other. And if they choose to collaborate and trust, they'll get a better overall outcome. However, what inevitably happens is that somehow the other one tries to game the other one and they end up with the worst possible outcome. And it feels to me like we're trapped in that cycle a little bit construction-wise, where we know that if we were to trust each other and work together and be collaborative, we'd get a better outcome. But due to our fears of the behaviour of the other side, we end up falling into the trap of actually getting the worst outcome.
And is that what's prohibiting our subcontractors, main contractors, and the likes of entering into early works, PCSAs, ECIs with our principals? Because effectively it's a lack of trust. Why are we having to go to a competitive tender each time to select those guys?
But part of what, in defence of the principals, I would just say that these guys have been caught in a trap also, where they're already in a contract situation that's probably not very favourable towards them. And it's a bit like the bully who just passes on someone who's getting bullied who bullies someone else. And so I think, as you say, it probably starts at the top and it needs to trickle right through and make sure those contractual values and approaches are repeated right through the process.
I think the key here is collaboration, trust, meeting of the minds. Let's fucking work together.
Yeah, and it takes time.
Yeah.
And you need to create the time.
Bearing in mind that behind all that, it's either a seller's or a buyer's market, depending on the cycle that's going on internationally.
Yeah.
And that adds another factor.
Another layer of complexity.
Yeah.
I suppose that's why we're here, aren't we?
If I take that
complex subject.
Take that back though, if you start at a truly collaborative approach and you start engaging with contractors at a high level, at a program of works or a asset management plan or forward works plan, and you're actually looking to level out the procurement of your packages to the market at all levels, not just head contractor, down to subcontractors as well, then you'll get a leveling of that, you'll build trust over a period of time, and you hopefully get better outcomes, which is...
It's a long game.
Yeah, it is.
It's a long game.
How do you feel, Matt, about the continuity? Because I feel like the industry's gone into quite a lot of flux, and what that's meant is when I first joined, I worked on Waterview, for example, and Waterview was the product of pretty much the same sort of characters working together for about 20 years, and it was a great outcome. But I feel like the industry's sort of been shaken up now, and it doesn't feel like that sort of continuity exists so much between these organisations anymore. And that would include, the contractors that are used to working with subbies and that type of thing. Because as you say, if you've got consistent work with the same sort of people in an ongoing way, then that trust builds, you get better outcomes, you sort of know what you can expect, and you get safety from that.
Yeah. I'd probably maybe not be the best person to comment because we've been working in quite a different industry outside of Auckland for quite a while, so I don't really have a feel for that.
Yeah.
We definitely do have ups and downs in terms of our workload, and we're always looking ahead 6 to 12 months saying where are our holes opening up and trying to really target projects accordingly, which is a bit of a challenge in itself, but that continuity, not sure.
Hey, Raine, so the role of the engineer to the contract and the associated project management company, do you believe that role adds value to the construction process currently as it stands?
Hey, listen, I've been battling the role of engineer to the contract for 11 years now.
Yep.
Almost every single dispute that I work on, there is a problem with the engineer to the contract. I probably remove via mediation half a dozen every year for not being fit for purpose.
You say half a dozen.
About half a dozen, roughly, from every project. There's no ability in 3910 to actually, for the contractor to make submissions to remove the engineer to the contract when he's clearly not, doing his job. And it's actually, by not doing his job is, detrimental to the outcome of the project, as we saw with Beechcroft Apartments. I'd put most of the blame on that one, actually, on that particular engineer to the contract, which got removed. And the problem is, the roles have now changed with the updated 3910. So we've got the independent certifier and the contract administrator, who can be the same, but probably won't be.
I think that's the only thing changed, the update.
It is really, it's giving validity now for different people to perform the role, whereas at the moment, lots of people are performing the role which haven't got delegated authority to do so, or any contractual authority to do so. So, I'm dealing with directors of these big PQS practices who are appointed engineer to the contract, but they have subordinates doing the job for him, not even delegated properly. You've got the banks. I've got 22 disputes on the go at the moment.
Really?
I've terminated 2 contracts. I've issued one developer, 3 different contractors. Terminated 2 of the contractors, 2 of the contracts. The other one, the third one, we've issued a default notice, principal interference, and lack of backbone by the engineer to the contract in that particular case. Even in that particular, and this is as bad as it gets, asking the engineer to the contract to deduct liquidated damages a year before the completion date's even due, because he thinks the contractor might be late. So we've issued default notices.
Really?
Yeah.
That is a true story.
It is a true story.
Both of us are working.
Yeah,
on that
I know. So I'm seeing the worst of the worst behaviours at the moment. I think that developers are under a lot of pressure with the banks because of all the delays due to COVID, increased costs, sunset dates aren't being met on finance. That pressure is going on to the engineer to the contract, who currently is unable in many cases, to be able to stand back and go, well, actually, this is a variation. I know it's not what you want to hear, but, this is the situation. And yes, they're entitled to an extension of time. But one at the moment is $7 million contract, where the engineer to the contract was negotiating the extension of time in August last year. As soon as the main contractor started issuing P&G costs for the delay, the principal has asked the engineer to the contract to just deduct liquidated damages, which currently stand at $1.5 million. So we have issued a formal extension of time. It's been, he didn't answer it. We asked for a formal decision under 1324. He's come back and said, no, you're time barred.
So what we're saying is,
this is the behaviour, and there's no time bar at all. This is standard form 3910. With the words reasonably practical thereafter, but we've got all these notifications, we've had all these meetings to discuss extensions of time, and he's just come back, well, because you put it in late, you're time barred. So there's a lot of really, really bad behaviour out there. But a lot of, I was at the Society of Construction Law engineer to the contract kind of role talk last night. But what is really, really clear is that from 11 years of working here, and I know I have the advantage of being dual qualified and having a master's in construction law, is that the people that are administering the contracts are not fit for purpose. They do not know about planning. They do not know about extensions of time. They do not know how to value and certify the works. So which is why we have all this cooking pot of different people kind of interfering with the process, because they don't understand contract law or contracts. They're not following the contract at all. They're doing the bidding of the principal in many cases. And I know that horizontal construction is quite different from vertical, and probably 95% of all the disputes I deal with are developers, are vertical construction. But it's the trouble I see with the role of engineer to the contract role, until they are trained to be fit for purpose, things aren't going to change. Now, I said last night at the SEL do as well, what we really need, because we talked about independence and impartiality, you're not going to get that if the principal's paying the bill.
100%.
So one of the submissions I put forward, which we did discuss briefly last night, but was told, well, this is what it is. This document that went out in draft is pretty much going to be what's actually submitted, was that we need to have the project pay for the CA or the independent certifier. For somebody to be truly independent, both parties, need to pay his bill.
Yep.
Easy to deal with, but again, is it going to be? Are we going to be seeing it? I don't think so.
But you know what scares me the most as well? Some of these engineers to the contract who aren't fit for purpose do not understand the amount of downstream pressure they send on a project, the amount of pressure they put on a project. It is insane, because I've dealt with it from a contractor side. When these guys are smoking pot, these guys fucking just pushing shit downhill, And yeah, I get it. You're protecting the client. That's apparently what you're meant to do. Not really, but
hey, listen. I mean, I've been, my days of being a QS and PM in England. I was contract administrator under JCT forms. I do anything from reviewing tenders, agreeing the works, variations, instructions, payment, everything. And one thing that was consistent through everything I did was actually, meetings to discuss variations, meetings to discuss delays. How can we mitigate these boys? And getting the subbies in. If it is an M&E, because in the UK those days it was one main contractor, and then you'd sub out the M&E and specialist, fire and stuff. So you'd have all the parties actually sitting there in a room, often after site office hours, discussing how we're going to actually mitigate this problem. That's never done here. There's just even though we've got a contract that says both parties should, got to issue the 521 notice and, may meet to discuss ways of mitigating it, never happens. Not from what I'm seeing. I mean, it may happen, but, I deal with a lot of projects and a lot of disputes, and it's just not there. That collaboration. And half the time I do believe that, it's because contract administrators don't actually know how to contract administer. They're not trained. You look at our QSs coming out of university here. They get virtually no training on contract or 3910. I ask contractors sometimes, why don't you get an NZQS? Because they're useless, really. They don't even know how to use a scale rule. They know nothing about contract. And this is, what I'm seeing every day. And these subcontracts that are actually being, are floating around industry at the moment, they're appalling. And then, a clear example of this, just obligations around time. In the UK in 2011, we banned retentions from being tied to the main contract. So subcontractors have a subcontract completion date and they get the retentions released there. Most of the subcontracts I'm looking at don't even have a completion date as per the contract program. What contract program? As per the main contract completion date. What? Because you haven't provided it. So then they moan about them not asking for an extension of time or time bar them. But actually, it's impossible for a subcontractor to ask an extension of time when A, he's given a 3-week look-ahead program and not an updated program monthly to show what's going before him and what's going after, and B, there's no due date for completion in his subcontract. So how does he work it out? It's incompetence right across the industry.
And if you bring that all the way back to the procurement process, that's often because the QS or the person letting the package doesn't know that they have to provide a copy of the head contract program or the tender dates, or sometimes we don't even get the subcontract details very well squared away. So again, trying to clarify those things through an offer is really important, but lots of people just don't, It becomes an issue.
Yeah, it's definitely a big issue out there.
Yeah. Okay. We'll wrap that up there, unless you have final thoughts, Marty.
No, I think I'll probably touch on some of that. I think when I talk on my subject, but there's certainly, I think, some symbiotic relationships with not setting up the project properly there as well. You think?
We'll get into that next. So far, we've spoken a lot about the challenges in the procurement process and the problems with the procurement process in the New Zealand construction industry. So, Marty, if there's something we could do differently, what do you reckon that would be? What does it look like?
Okay, well,
a better procurement model.
I think you know where I'm coming from from previous discussions, but let's just throw out there PCSA and ECI. But before I sort of get into those, what I've heard today is we've all spoke independently about the wider issues in the industry, okay? And I think all those roads lead to one thing, and that is if we can get a common solution to all of those problems, all of a sudden, the amount of engineers that are not fit for purpose, the amount of misinformation that you have to, or lack of information, emissions, etc., that you have to somehow try and have contingency for in your pricing at tender level, they all go away, because the one common denominator is that as long as the information that we're all looking at is the same information, it's the same program, and it's 99% completed design, and a lot of these problems go away. So how do we get to that point in time where we have, a 99.9% design? I'm probably reaching quite high there, but and it's got to be through that one word that we all bring up a lot, but never seems to quite gain traction in the industry, and that's collaboration. So if we're all batting for the same side, in that at the front end of these projects, we decide all the risks together. We decide what the program looks like together based on working with the design together, by bringing in experts from every field to contribute their knowledge of how long it takes to sort of work out all the holes in your pipeline pricing. All of a sudden, the engineer of the contract hasn't got any problems to solve, because everyone is priced on the same page. Everyone's, the BIM model has captured all of those clashes, or at least, again, 99% of them. So that when we get to that real world, we've already built it once. We built it once in the virtual world, and we built it once commercially, correctly, well, at least as accurately as we can. At the moment, 60, 70, 80% at best will be our probably common level that we achieve. And that leads us into PCSAs. So, I've been fortunate enough to work on one particular PCSA that went really, really well during COVID. And the net outcome was a project that was on time and on budget during COVID. So it can be done.
Yeah.
And it had all the usual players. It had, your significant PQSs out there, had a significant client, and it had significant consultants. Yes, there was some issues. Could we have done it better? Yeah. But this is one of the first steps, this particular PCSA. So, and that worked on about 12 months out from build. And it made brave decisions like, let's split the consent. Let's start the bits we can so that we're taking the pressure off the program. It brought in early contractors. We had to speak to some of the rebar specialists out there to get some idea of the foundation design, because that was one of our early consents.
So, James, you've worked in a lot of alliances that are set up for collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, the part...
Is there true collaboration?
I don't want to be the negative guy.
You don't need to be the negative.
You need a 10th man in every room.
Yeah, but part of the reason I'm just trying to think. I mean, when I look at some of the projects I've been on and why you might make a procurement decision for an alliance as your delivery model, is that idea of the fact that you don't have detail, and you're sort of trying to provide the environment in which to create that detail, I guess. And so the part that I was just confused about, and it's a clarity that might be worth it for everyone, is sort of saying, right, well, how we break up the project into its stages and what detail we expect to be created at each of those stages, so that we're building towards a point where we do have the definition that we require, having taken in all the inputs that we require. And so the question being, of course, at which point along that line do we contract? Do we start to say, right, well, now we've got a deal, or now we have a price, or whatever it is? Or is it actually more just about managing, as you say, the collaborative behaviours right through that process so that everyone is getting treated fairly?
I think I would answer that by analogy, a space analogy. Okay, we live around the sun. Okay, around this sun there's a Goldilocks zone. Yeah, where all the correct ingredients for a successful life exist. The same could be said for that program of procurement, starting with the concept design right through to where you sign up, subcontractors. The Goldilocks zone, I feel, is somewhere around that end of preliminary design, start of developed design.
Mm.
That's the point where you've got the
Opportunity.
architects and the consultants had enough to collaboration, enough design to sort of put a really, really good idea on the table. But it's not fixed in terms of where the material comes from. It's not fixed in terms of when you go for consent. So if you get the right ingredients for the cake at that point, that Goldilocks zone, then all of a sudden things will start evolving. So it's timing.
It's interesting though. I mean, in the latest alliance I've worked in, they had a design team that were probably the most commercially savvy group I'd worked with. And I mean commercially savvy in the sense of being very committed to their cost and time outcomes. What that meant though, of course, is that they didn't want change. We can't handle change.
And that's one of the challenges.
Because this is what we've priced and this is what we're doing and we're on track to deliver it. And they wanted to make it very, very clear because when you get to that delivery phases, I think there's a very easy trap to fall into an alliance to blame the designers. Now, what that meant though, is that the true benefit you get from that alliance is the input of all those different contracting groups you can bring into the conversation. So what they were doing was creating a great outcome for the design team in terms of being able to say, we did what we said we were going to do. But in terms of the project had compromised on outcome because it wasn't collecting the inputs that it needed to get the best possible solutions. And so there's an answer to that problem, isn't it? Which is to get those people in earlier, get them involved in the process earlier and be realistic of our expectation of how long it takes because design's tricky. Getting design definition, that's tough work. And making sure all the standards that you've got to meet, that's tough work. So having the clear expectation somehow that we're going to take the time to get those people in the room together and get a solution that people are happy with. And we're going to have to be a bit more flexible about potentially what some of those program timelines are in order to achieve it. And I mean, there's a famous thing, and I've spoken to Andy about this before, where having a piece of work and that's 95% complete, or a number of, say you've got 10 zones on your project and all of them are 95% complete. Well, that's not much use to, is it? One complete zone is way more use to you than having 10 that are at 95%. And so those
will tell you the last 5% is the hardest.
And so don't get me wrong, there's moments where in your process you'll say, hey, we've cordoned off this bit, we've got enough definition, we can go forward with this area and we can build something. There's danger in the sense that we often, through our process, and again, even through our process of procurement, in order to get to a deal, we end up creating all sorts of compromises that sow the seeds for our later discontent. And I actually had a wonderful moment where we were sitting with the group and there were a few sort of compromises being reached. And I actually said, okay, we have to avoid being the guys that everyone reflects on in 2 years' time and says, what the fuck were those guys thinking? Because as you said, there's a process that has to be gone through to get to a deal. And we want a deal so we can get on with it. And we realize it's not going to be perfect. But it does mean that the continuity between those groups needs to somehow make sure that everyone understands why it was that compromise was reached, so that we don't spend our lives just complaining about it and sending blame down the chain. So, and answer to the query, I think you're exactly right. But the client or organisational expectations at the outset need to be clear on what's actually involved in achieving that and being prepared to go down that path.
That's about openness, isn't it, amongst clients, where you have had a successful project, is to share that success so that the precedent is set. I mean, I can tell you now that it wasn't perfect. There was a few things like we thought we could do the secondary steel design, after the primary steel design. In hindsight, you couldn't really. It was a big laboratory building. There was a lot of secondary steel, almost primary steel, really. So okay, next time let's include that with the primary steel. Let's keep it as one package. So you learn these lessons, but you don't learn them if you don't even attempt that process or attempt the PCSA. If we keep on doing the same thing, then we don't even get a chance to evolve an ECI or a PCSA.
So does it fall to our leaders as to make sure that environment is established and that we remain true to it?
Yes, look, it does. I mean, look, at the end of the day, a potential client is always going to look at the options, procurement options on the market, available in the wider market. At the moment, he looks at the options, and he's probably advised by certain organisations to stick with the fixed price lump sum. Beat everyone down to that lowest price. True, you said when you start looking at the other examples out there, you quite often find that a collaboration can actually come within budget and beat the program just because people are talking at the right time.
Well,
Otherwise, you're waiting for the daisy chain to be built, aren't you?
Yeah, 100%. So I want to pick this up with Matt now. You've in your past, you've been a design manager, and this exact scenario that we're discussing, you've dealt with this exact scenario working out of the Becker's office for a period of time. What worked well there?
I think initially the commercial tension was released from that project due to the nature of the project being emergency drought response work.
Yep. It just gives us a little bit of context of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so this is, we've talked about before on the podcast, Waikato 50, which was initiated probably near on 3 years ago. It was a response to the lack of rainfall, funnily enough, in Auckland, which dictated, and the projections were that we would potentially run out of water in Auckland. So effectively Watercare identified that and said, we need to get a project team together to deliver a upgrade to the plant out at Tuakau to deliver another 50 million litres of water per day. And effectively what was done is from the enterprise model, which I'll touch on shortly, but through the enterprise model, they selected Fletcher Construction to deliver that package. And from, I think, after the call was made at Watercare, I was sitting in Watercare's office within a week. We had a project team sitting in Becker's probably 2 weeks later, and we built organically the team up to deliver the design collaboratively all the way through to when boots hit the ground, and delivered on time, thanks to a great planner, by the way.
Represented.
I guess that was an unleashed collaborative environment that extracted the maximum value, both in probably more in program than in cost. I have to be clear on that. That was a program-driven project. We extracted the maximum value through very early ECI engagement to determine how we could do that better.
Who made the brave call?
That was Watercare itself. I don't know who within Watercare, but it was a very brave call.
That
It was probably
I'll
born out of
clarify
necessity.
that was Ravine. I had him on the podcast recently.
Oh, yeah.
We had another chat about it.
And it was born out of necessity.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to see is those brave calls being born out of non-necessity. And I think I'll touch on briefly now that there is a number of councils and principals who are taking those steps. The enterprise model was a good example that Watercare are moving down that path of working with selected contractors based on their attributes and their ability to deliver long programs of work. I personally believe there's the elements where it's diluted down into subcontractor level doesn't show that true collaboration. But we're on the flip side, we're working currently with New Plymouth District Council, who have gone for a panel selection and are going to have awarded that and have already given us a program of works, and we've already engaged ECI at very early stage. And one really important point to note out is that there's so many models out there that demonstrate that earlier you get people working together and ECI happening, the more value you extract out of the project. And then I think that's more applicable even in horizontal infrastructure than vertical, because there's so many options around alignments, depths, methodologies, and the likes of. So yeah, and then also Watercare, notably, they're going to be coming out with a asset upgrades and renewals program of works where they're going to make selections primarily based on non-price attributes, which will unleash a good 20 contractors, I guess at least, on a program of works for 5 to 10 years. So the transition is happening, and I'm really pleased to see that. I'd like that to be pushed out more wider. And the really important bit is not just the top layer of collaboration, but push that through the behaviours and values that's demonstrated by all. So we're seeing it at the subcontractors, the next level of subcontractors, all the tiers down. So it's not just the top guys that go, okay, you have a model that encourages collaboration, but the next level down, you're actually doing non-priced attributes only selection of the lowest performing bid, and there's elements of the contract that you're engaged in under the panel that suggest you must use the lowest price.
Yeah.
And then cost consultants putting through and saying that must be the case. So those are kind of contradictory. So the behaviours are starting at the right levels. They just need to be filtered down.
What are your thoughts on this, Raine?
Oh, definitely. Listen, I mean, we need an integrated, going back to the words of Sir Peter Egan in the mid-1990s, we need an integrated approach. We've got to stop working in silos. We've got to, have that collaboration from top to bottom, and with that collaboration, comes trust and better behaviours. It worked in the UK. I mean, Network Rail were one of the most adversarial employers of all time. They did a complete turnaround and had a supply chain of something like 700, consultant subcontractors, put them all on fantastic, payment terms. It completely changed the face of Network Rail and actually working for them and people actually wanting to work for them. So we know that, those values work. It worked in the UK in the mid-1990s with the birth of the NEC and a different way of working. I do feel as though this is where New Zealand is now, is that we need, we haven't got a Sir Michael Latham or a Sir Peter Egan actually, doing this research on the industry. It's a much smaller industry, but unless we change things, with inflation running quite high, interest rates running really, really high, with poor contract drafting, with unfit, contract engineers, the contract is just going to keep getting worse. So we've really got to change. And this is, I've had more disputes land on my desk in the last couple of months than I've had in 11 years. And that's telling of the fact that the industry just isn't working. And then, this change is needed and change for the better.
Yeah, perhaps, as you said, then necessity will breed this innovation that we need to change things.
Well, we're going to lose, good subcontractors otherwise, because everyone's chasing the same dollar.
I think we already are, aren't we?
Yeah, it's with a lot of, absolutely 60% of all, 70% of all liquidations last September were contract companies. They can't survive if they're not being paid. I've got 22 disputes on at the moment, and out of the 22, 17 are subcontractors that are chasing payment. Retentions for all jobs that finished a year ago. That should be an easy thing to attain, yet it's not.
I was just saying on the flip side of that, we have a huge infrastructure underinvestment that needs to be rectified in the near future. So the subcontractors going under, and we have increased capacity. We just don't have enough skilled people in this country and skilled contractors in the country to deliver everything that's required. So, hopefully we don't get to the point of necessity. There's hopefully some people out there that are recognising this.
I think to some extent we're already there. When you look at the critical infrastructure that we need to build in terms of healthcare, we're already there. We're going backwards. The longer we take to make a decision on this critical infrastructure and kicking off, because at the end of the day, it's never cheaper than now. And every year that we push this back, it's bringing it's compounding the problem and the fear.
Time is more expensive than money, isn't it? I've said that
time is money, absolutely.
So how do we celebrate the success of good collaborations and publish that to people who will listen? That's the question.
But this is interesting, isn't it? I mean, in England, we had the Audit Commission. So all the government projects were audited and it was public, whether or not they were successful or not. I don't think that happens here. So, unless it's by word of mouth, you don't actually know, or you're someone like me that does lots of disputes, GP, your general public and consultants have no idea just how badly, projects are going. So, we need to kind of address the fact that, and I know we can do it by this sort of kind of, get together, but there needs to be some publicising, just how badly the industry is performing, some kind of KPI index. I think Construction Clients Group may do something, but whether or not they're getting all the information, I think, they're getting it from select people and select companies. It's, that information is not out there. So everyday consultants, contractors, apart from the subcontractors, are really, really hurting. You've got no idea really quite how bad it is, only from a singular kind of level.
Cool. So just to wrap things up, can I go around the room and ask each one of you to answer one question in one sentence?
This is an Andy question.
Oh, probably. It's an Andy question. I'm winging this, mate. All right. Tell me one thing you would change in the process in one sentence.
Next. Let's go to the next one. Let me think about it.
You think about it. All right, Marty? One thing you would change in the process.
My answer is to change that procurement model, get the PCSAs out there, and let's go and build things correctly and in a timely manner.
Cool. James?
I think needs to be an adjustment of expectations on the client side in particular would be my biggest.
Right. Raine?
Collaboration, clearly, and upskilling the contract administrators.
Wrapping up, mate?
Yeah, I still haven't thought of it. Because it's just, I think we've raised so many points through this discussion, and I don't know where you start. I mean, if I take it back to the examples of really fantastic collaboration, I'd just say PCSA, ECI, early engagement, selection of contractors and subbies.
Yeah, okay. So looks like there's a common theme here.
There is.
Go on.
One last thing.
Yep.
In order to feed this machine and even the old machine, we need more skilled people. We need to start training people younger. There's a big gap.
Well, you train them and they pack up and go across the ditch.
Well, that's a different
That's a
topic
common
on a
theme.
different
Yeah,
podcast,
anyways,
I
yeah,
think, mate.
100%. Yeah, I'm not going to bring that up. But again, I think there's a common theme here, which is collaboration, ECIs, PCSAs, and better understanding of clients. Would you guys agree? That's
Yeah.
summarizing it. Cool. Awesome. That's wrapping that up. That was such an awkward wrap up.
So thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Appreciate you taking time out of your day.
Yeah, hang on.
What do you want for lunch?
Oh, we're going for lunch. I think Bridge booked us a restaurant somewhere. So okay. So wrapping it up. Yeah. So yep. Hey guys, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for all your inputs. I really hope that the New Zealand public listen to this and make positive change in our procurement model and we start working collaboratively. But thank you all for your time and input into this podcast. It's been a truly enjoyable experience for me.
Good to be here. Thank
You're
you.
welcome, mate.
Thank you,
Cheers,
mate.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for
Cheers,
inviting
guys.
us.